Mr. Swing, or may I call you Bill? You and I have talked many times in the past, and I've always admired your sense of candour and great sense of optimism. And for this rather special Geneva audience that we have today, thanks to this video recording, please tell me and all those watching us the role of the International Organization for Migration, and in particular, what it is that you actually do as its leader.
Thank you, Mr. McKay, and by turns, if I may call you Michael. First of all, it's a great honor to be here with this distinguished audience and with you, sir. I really appreciate the opportunity. The organization I head, the International Organization for Migration, was founded in 1951. It's our 65th year. We were founded initially simply to bring many European refugees ravaged by the Second World War to safe shores and new lives, Canada, the US, Australia, and elsewhere. Since then, we've expanded both in following the complexity of migration to be now a global organization, 162 member states, much of the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere, all of Africa, much of Asia and the Middle East and Europe. We now have 10,000 persons worldwide in about 480 places. We're carrying out projects in the interest of member states and migrants. We're pursuing three objectives, basically. Number one is to try to reduce the number of forced migrants, those who have to leave home because of revolution, natural disaster, or otherwise, to protect them along the migratory path. Secondly, to try to ensure that people at all skill levels are able to get to the jobs that need to be filled. And then finally, to make sure that the rights of all of these people, irregular or regular migrants, are protected. And we've done that for many years and we'll be continuing. We work very closely with the United Nations, even though we're not part of the UN.
I see. Now, these are particularly onerous times for your organization, and even more onerous, sometimes even life-threatening for the men, women and children crossing seas and land borders, even as we speak. I deliberately avoid using the descriptive word migrant or refugee, as we'll almost certainly discuss that more precisely later in our conversation. My first two questions are these. What is your opinion about high net worth immigration? And my second question is, please share with us your thoughts about whether this particular type of immigration has an impact on the current crisis. Is it an irrelevance? Or is it a hindrance? Or could it even be a help in the current crisis? I just want to know what you think.
Right. If I may, I'd like maybe just to set the scene a little bit in terms of where we are in the migration field. I think we find ourselves in the middle of a perfect storm. We have more people on the move than ever before. About 1 billion in our 7 billion world are migrants. About 250 million are crossing borders, and about 750 million are migrating within their own country. Secondly, we have more forced migration than at any time since the Second World War, about 20 million refugees, 40 million internally displaced persons. I've just come back from Syria yesterday, and to see how many people are suffering as a result of the conflict there shows you that forced migration is a major issue of our time. In addition to that, we have growing and widespread anti-migrant sentiment where migration has become a negative word, whereas we know from our own countries that migration has always been, historically, an overwhelmingly positive concept. So I think in the midst of this, governments are finding that their populations are losing confidence in their ability to manage these migratory flows, and we're there to try to get through this perfect storm to safer shores.
It might be useful for the audience to say, just to clarify the difference between a refugee and a migrant.
Yes. All refugees are migrants, but not all migrants are refugees. They come in many categories: internally displaced persons. We have economic migrants. We have students. Anyone who's on the move, in effect, it qualifies as a migrant. But in terms of the percentages, you take my figure of 240, 250 million international migrants, about just slightly less than 10% are actually refugees. So we're dealing with a much more complex situation. And now, of course, we have simultaneous, complex, protracted crises from the western bulge of Africa into Asia, which is pushing more and more people on migratory routes heading towards safer shores.
Something topical now. Given the current migration crisis and the recent Panama Papers, which is all over the media, is it bad PR for countries to be selling citizenship to the rich? And if so, if your view is that this kind of immigration can actually help the situation, what can industry do to improve its perception? What can the industry that is involved in selling citizenship do to improve its perception?
I think the important thing will be, what are the results of this? If the objective is to have a higher standard of living for the local population and migrants, if the object is to create employment, because once a person has a job, they're no longer a migrant or a refugee. They then can start paying taxes and helping out. So if the idea is to contribute to these economies, which are bereft by so many people departing, I'm thinking now particularly the Caribbean, that this is then something that one can see as having practical benefit. If they're bringing in skills, are they going to do training to upgrade the level of skills of the local population? Those are the sorts of things that we will judge these arrangements by, I think, and judge in the sense of assess them.
Okay. Well, let's just examine another aspect of that, Bill. There have been calls by some for a global citizens tax to help finance better solutions. In your view, should or could the United Nations or the European Union, just to mention two possibilities, do more to facilitate practical answers to today's migration problems? And if you could give me some practical examples as answers to those solutions.
Well, several things. I think we need to think about migration today in terms of human mobility, the will of people to get to better lives, safer shores, to get to work that needs to be done so they can take care of their families. So frankly, the key thing is to try to assist these people along the migratory routes. I think we have too often in the past dealt with migrants in terms of stereotypes. They're coming to take our jobs, maybe they're bringing in a criminal element, maybe they're bringing in disease, and those kinds of things. Whereas in point of fact, we should have policies that help them to integrate into the local fabric, society and economy, but also to continue to play a role at home, a diaspora. One needs to both be in the host and the home communities at the same time.
So you have two identities.
Absolutely. You have multiple identities today. So I think that more we can do to help people to integrate into society and become contributing citizens who are paying tax, because the taxes that migrants pay far outweigh the amount of public services they're getting. In any case, if you object to migrants having access to public services, you have to ask the question, do you want unhealthy migrants? No, you want them to have access to health services. Do you want uneducated migrant children? Well, obviously, no, you want them to have access to schools.
What about entrepreneur visas? What's your view of that kind of visa? That's a visa for high net worth individuals who are prepared to make significant investment in countries in exchange for citizenship. Could this help mitigate the issue of migrant employment, or is it too simplistic?
Well, of course, we view all migrants as high net worth migrants, but I know what you're speaking about, people who are willing to invest money in order to create jobs, if they're creating jobs, if they are offering training to upgrade skills. Those are all positive things and should be encouraged.
Bill, even though we're having this conversation in Geneva, Switzerland, and our audience today is global, the industry they represent is truly international, how do you think the citizenship by investment industry could become better and more fully engaged in the bigger migration issue? Or do you see matters in a more compartmentalized or separate terms? Now, before you answer that, let me give you an example. Would a program which sells access to the Schengen area by bringing in much needed investment leading to the creation of jobs be feasible in your view, or would the obstacles to progress just be insurmountable in terms of Schengen, the Schengen area?
I think the important aspect is to conduct your policies in a manner that allows migrants to achieve their full potential and make their full contribution. We know that Forbes 500 shows that about 40% of all CEOs in the United States were either migrants or children of migrants.
40%?
It's as high as 40%, very high. We know that in Germany, through the Bertelsmann Foundation study, that on the average, migrants contribute more than 3,000 euros a year to the economy. And if you multiply that by a million, you'll see how effective that is. We also know that the remittances that migrants can earn from various investments is about $450 to $500 billion a year, which is double all direct aid, and it's almost equivalent to direct foreign investment. What it means is that this is roughly the equivalent of the GDP of a small to medium-sized European country. And if you took the 250 million international migrant figure I gave you, this would mean that if they became a country, they would be slightly smaller than Indonesia in population and slightly larger than Brazil.
These are surprising numbers.
Surprising numbers. And I think the figure of 250 million probably is on the low side. We don't really know. So it's a major issue of our time. It's a global trend, a mega trend, and it's something that's going to require the attention of all responsible policymakers for many years to come.
Now, turning to the bigger picture, the burning issues on your desk, well, I just wonder what they are and whether matters will get worse before they get better in terms of the big picture of migration today. What's your view on that?
Well, I think, first of all, we should have all known several years ago that there was likely to be an outflow of migrants coming into Europe and other parts of the world because of this unmitigated crisis situation we have. I don't recall a time in my life when we've had so many simultaneous, complex, and protracted crises, most of all, of course, being Syria, but you have Iraq, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Boko Haram in Nigeria, Ebola in the Mana River Union area, and many, many others that I didn't mention. And you cannot expect that people who have been living in refugee camps or internally displaced, their children have been in school for several years, they can't work on the local economy, their life is on hold, they're not going to take that for so much longer, and they're going to head somewhere seeking a better life. So we need to have a unity of view on this, and what we really need most of all right now in some of these areas is a more comprehensive, long-term, complex policy on migration and asylum so that we're able to deal with these matters not in a patchwork, Band-Aid, piecemeal type way, but bring into all the elements that are required, including a strong integration package so people can make their contribution. Otherwise, you end up with ghettos, you end up with homegrown violence, and all the things we want to avoid.
My last question, Bill, is many people watching us today are well connected, people of influence in their own country, in their own governments, in their own professions, in their own jurisdictions. What are the important parting messages which you'd like to communicate to them? And please underline why, in your view, these messages are so important.
Let me start with two. First of all, and this is why I'm very pleased about this interview, because it's a chance to speak to a wider audience, we must all work together to try to change the migration narrative. Right now it is toxic, and the migration narrative should be much more historically accurate, which is that migration contributes to development, and both of the individual and of the society. That message has now been lost. It's been replaced by one which links migration with negative connections, including terrorism. The second one is closely related. We need to help people and governments to begin to manage diversity in a responsible, humane, and dignified manner.
And tell us what that means.
What I mean by that is that if you look at the demographic figures, all of the OECD countries, for example, including Japan, including my own country, the United States and others, we have two phenomena here. One, people are living longer and they're having fewer children. So Japan alone will need tens of millions of workers at all skill levels. that they won't have by 2050. Same thing for Europe. Europe maybe, I don't know, the estimate's 40 million, 50 million. So we need to begin planning for that now. And to do that, we need to link humanitarian and compassionate concerns with our own economic concerns. And it links up rather nicely. But if we're only thinking in terms of pushback, we won't get there. So I think those are the two. I believe that based on the drivers of migration, demography, disasters, demand for labor, discrepancy socioeconomically between global north and global south that is growing, desperation migration, all of these things, all of our societies are going to become inexorably much more multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious. Now, and I'll close with this, if we leave the debate about one of identity, we're not going to be able to solve the issue. Why? People who don't look like you, speak as you do, dress as you do, practice your religion, they're not going to change. They're going to be there. So you have to try to move the debate to one about common interests, shared values. That allows you to then have a rational debate and to come up with something that works in the interest of all. So I think that's, for me, the big challenge that we face. And that is a psychological challenge. Continents such as Europe and others that have been over many centuries continents of origin, peopling the world, are now becoming continents of destination. And that is another psychological adjustment that needs to be made, and I'm sure it will be made. I think everybody's struggling for answers, and I think the debate is very healthy right now.
Bill Swing, thank you for your time today. Wish you continued success in your great venture.
Thank you.